Hi, everybody. It's Carlos Valdes-Dapena back with you. I'm the author of Lessons from Mars, How One Global Company Cracked the Code on High-Performance Collaboration and Teamwork, as well as running my own consulting firm. And today, I want to talk about Mars. I was a Mars associate, and by the way, Mars has used that term for its employees since the 1930s or 1920s. It's a term that's become very popular, but Mars was on that decades ago. And it's one of the things I always loved about working for Mars. It's a great sense of egalitarianism, and it made being an associate somehow more engaging. Now, if you don't know already, Mars is a little bit of a quirky company. It's a privately owned company worth, and I'm approximating here because they're privately owned, the numbers are not publicly available, around $40 billion. They work in three major segments. They work in pet care and pet food. They work in confectionery, products like M&Ms and, let's see, what else, Wrigley's gum. And they also in the food business in North America, primarily Uncle Ben's rice. You can look up all of that online, and I love the brands and the products. But what I love about Mars is that quirkiness. So, for example, you may be aware that until about 3 years ago, every Mars associate had to punch a time clock. That includes the global CEO. All of us would walk in and with our badges electronically punch a time clock, right? There are no corner offices at Mars. There are no executive parking spaces. Mars has been in an open office since the 1930s at least. They were doing open office before it was a thing. It's all in that spirit of work together. We're all associates. We're all going to get it done through collaboration, really. Collaboration has been in the Mars DNA since well before I joined the company. I came in, as I said, in 2000, and I was a general internal organizational consultant. As I think I mentioned in the previous podcast, I was doing things like org design, and I was working with teams a little bit. Around 2008, though, they asked me to expressly focus on teams. And I was a little unsure. I kind of liked my broad portfolio, but I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. And I began to consult the teams using what I knew. What did I know? What I learned back in my days as an external consultant, I knew this thing called Tuckman's 4 stages of team development. I learned it when I was attending my master's program in org development back in the late 2000s, when I was still working at IBM. I was working with the traditional toolkit that team consultants use. Oh, by the way, there was an external firm working with Mars teams that used the very same thing, which is why it was especially easy for me to adopt that approach, because it's what Mars teams were used to based on their work with this external firm. I spent about 2 years doing this, flying around the globe. It was very exciting, and I felt like I was making a big difference at Mars. When I was approached by the Mars Learning and Development function called Mars University to develop a module to go in one of the core leadership development programs at Mars, a module on teamwork. Now here's the thing. I sat down to figure out what should be in that. What would the content of that be? And I reflected on the work I'd been doing with teams. I reflected on what I learned at the consulting firm, on my days way back at the stock photo agency. And it occurred to me as I was pondering, none of those approaches to team effectiveness really felt right. There was just something off. It was an intuition I had. And I went to a colleague at Mars University and said, you know what, I'm thinking about this, and that 4 stages thing, that just doesn't seem right. It's based on psychology, and it seems a little complex. You can teach it to managers, but could they really use it? And she said, you know, you're right, that's really interesting. Why don't you look at all the data you've collected from the, at that point, 120 plus teams I'd worked with? Now, what she meant was, I interview team members and I give them a survey before I work with the team. And so I had all that on the hard drive on my computer. This was in the days before the cloud. I have to admit, when she suggested that, I was a little wary. I thought, that's a lot of data. On the other hand, I didn't know where else to turn. So I said, sure, I'll do it. And working with my wife, who is my business partner to this day, I began to dig through all the interviews, which we cut up into little snippets of quotes from over 400 team members. as well as look at the survey data. And I was padding around my home office, pondering all this stuff dumped into a spreadsheet, when something began to emerge. What began to emerge, first of all, emerged slowly and was not what I expected. I have to admit, when I first started digging into this information, I didn't think I'd find anything. But lo and behold, there was a message in there, and it was contradictory. It was not consistent with what I knew about team development. And in order to understand it, I actually had to integrate what I learned about motivation from my time at IBM. The insights that arose from that research formed the heart of the framework that I began to develop, and then with a team of folks from Mars University built into what you'll see in the book Lessons from Mars. And in fact, it's the framework Mars adopted as its standard for collaboration. It's different. And that's the point of these podcasts, really. Like Mars, this framework is a little different. And I'm really excited about that because, as you can hear, I'd formed a skepticism about the conventional approaches to team building. And this gave me an opportunity to address that skepticism and come forward working with this team with something that would really, really make a difference. And that's what these podcasts are all about. We're going to spend a little time on the background. I'm going to walk you through some of the things besides the 4 stages that we thought weren't really working well. I'll go a little more deeply into why the 4 stages don't work. Then we'll get to some of the insights from the research, and I'll talk particularly later on in the podcast about these 6 practices of high-performance collaboration. You can find these 6 practices at my website, corporatecollaboration.com. There's a booklet there. It's brief, but it gives you an overview if you're impatient and don't want to wait until later in this series of podcasts. So take a look if you like. I'll look forward to going deeper into the background, telling some of the stories about how things evolved at Mars and how we landed where we did, and then eventually getting you into the nitty-gritty details of the framework and give you some ideas about how you use it. Ultimately, it's all in the book Lessons from Mars, and I can't wait to start talking with you. See you next time. Thanks. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, or you can contact me through my website, lessonsfrommars.net. That's lessonsfrommars.net.